broke off. It's Boeing's fault. And the FBI said, we are investigating the possibility, awaiting cockpit voice recording, that this was an intentional act by one of the flight crew. And the Egyptians said, well, it's impossible because suicide is, they really said this, suicide is scorned upon by Quran. Yeah, we've seen that. That's why I'm 40% deaf on the right side, because of their dislike of suicide. Somebody intentionally did this. So back in a second, a flashback to a prior experience that Boeing had with Egypt Air really, really is resonating. That and more coming up. It is 1999. I take you back to, well, actually, let's go back to a couple days ago. China Eastern Airlines jet flying a normal route to Guangzhou, and it suddenly nosed over at cruise altitude, 29,000 feet, and dove. That's about all that is known for certain about the unusual crash that almost certainly killed all 132 people aboard the aircraft. If you've seen the wreckage, by the way, you know that that is prevarication of the most journalistic kind. Yeah, unless you could survive a plunge at 550 miles an hour, it's perpendicular to China, then I'm going to go ahead and call the ball on that one. You're dead. Word today is that the cockpit voice recorder, both black boxes are in the tail, and now you see why, by the way. The CVR has been recovered. Flight data, what's interesting about the near real-time information that something like ADS-B gives you is that you have a second-by-second accounting for altitude, speed, and heading. Now, as far as like literal control inputs, what ADS-B does not send up is, left aileron was applied and then, back elevator or anything like that. All you know is what the plane did. Well, and we don't know what it did or did not do. But in China, China's worst air tragedy, of course, nothing bad happens in China. Bat soup viruses, none of that. It's from imported Norwegian seafood. And if you don't say so, we're going to shut down your World Health Organization investigation a year after the outbreak. But so guess what? It's fueling conspiracy theories and claims of U.S. involvement. And part of me, this is just so weird. I kind of suspect the Chinese government, whose number one goal is to not ever embarrass China. And if anything's embarrassing to China, cover it up and blame the U.S. somehow. That's what? It's fueling conspiracy theories and claims of U.S. involvement. And part of me, this is just so weird. I kind of suspect the Chinese government, whose number one goal is to not ever embarrass China. And if anything's embarrassing to China, cover it up and blame the U.S. somehow.
I'm very skeptical that we'll get any real answers or concrete answers out of this.
Now, by very skeptical, do you mean in complete disbelief?
Yeah, complete
okay, then
disbelief.
You mispronounced it.
What we do know is that they found 183 plane parts. Yeah, cockpit voice recorder found, set for analysis. The pilots did not answer calls, must have been from air traffic control, and the jet plunged at almost the speed of sound.
Yeah, 737's not built for that. Again, there's big reason the Blue Angels don't fly them, because the Navy has them, but they just use them for not Blue Angel stuff. And so increasingly, and as far as I know, and I checked with our sister station, an actual news station, and I said, as far as you know, have you heard, has the phone rang at Renton or Chicago? Have the Chinese brought in Boeing? Because there's absolutely zero chance the NTSB gets involved because it's America. This is what's crazy about this is so far how it's paralleling 1999. Do you remember the mysterious 767 that Egypt Air originates at LAX, goes to JFK, and then on to Cairo? Okay, long flight. Do you remember this 767 that mysteriously plummeted into the Atlantic off Massachusetts, Greg?
I do not remember this story, actually. Flight 990, Egypt Air?
990, thank you.
Okay.
Okay. So
on Halloween, no less. The
aircraft, because of the length of the flight, had a relief crew. Who were said to be dead. My dad used to deadhead from Hawaii to Japan to Narita all the time because he was in the FAA, and you let that guy, if there's an empty seat, my dad would ride in the cockpit. called deadheading. So, but that's not what the relief pilot was. He was a relief pilot, and the command pilot flew from LAX to JFK, and then they ascend out of JFK, get it up to cruise altitude, and the command pilot says, "Oh, well, that's it for me. I'm going to get 30 winks, and who's the chap who's going to take over for me?" And that chap happened to be Gamil al-Batouti. Or no, wait, the relief first officer, 59-year-old Gamil al-Batouti. And they said, "Gamil, get up here. I am 57-year-old Captain Command Pilot Ahmed al-Habashi. I'm going to go sleepy, snooze, and so you take over." And so what happened is they crashed in international waters. The Egyptians began the investigation. They were lead agency. It was their airliner. And they very quickly said, "Yeah, this is very far from Egypt. Can the NTSB take over?" So the NTSB takes over. And early on, the NTSB said, this aircraft departed from, and let me get the wording, because this is just like the Chinese 737. There was a departure from normal cruise flight and subsequent impact with the Atlantic Ocean. So there seems to be are you leaving something out in the middle there? And so the NTSB said, "We're going to ask the FBI to come into this." And the Egyptians said, "Oh, what do you mean? It was clearly a problem with the aircraft. Somebody in Everett probably poured their coffee on a nut and it corroded and it broke off. It's Boeing's fault." And the FBI said, "We are investigating the possibility, awaiting cockpit voice recording, that this was an intentional act by one of the flight crew." And the Egyptians said, "Well, it's impossible because suicide is," they really said this, "suicide is scorned upon by Quran." Yeah, we've seen that. That's why I'm 40% deaf on the right side, because of their dislike of suicide. So anyway, the Egyptians began by saying whatever it wasn't what you're implying it was. Well, it turned out that the relief pilot took control, took it off autopilot, and he said, "I put my life in the hands of God," and went brrr, and he did a Microsoft flight simulator dive into the Atlantic Ocean. And the Egyptians, to this day, have never accepted that. But anyway, this I think we're not even going to get to that point. At least the Egyptians called the NTSB in.
This podcast is brought to you by Chris Hudak.
As the women's tournament going on. And and they used to, I want to say they used to do it like a week ahead or something like that. But I accidentally left the TV unresolved. Are you saying that the Russians planted hash vape cassettes on her?
What? Excuse me? What was that last part?
Yeah. And by the way, just pro tip for the
or even full for the last 20 years, which is there's kind of an intermingling of our economies and the like, but underneath the surface, fascism and a brutal dictatorship was forming or even fully realized within the last 2 decades.
The KGB took over.
Yeah, exactly. And so, we made some money. We did this. We were friendly. This guy got killed. What? Excuse me? What was that last part?
Yeah. And by the way, just pro tip for the entire I watch the news all weekend long. I don't think I'm in a position where I can, and I don't blame anyone for turning it off and tuning it out all weekend long. Not a problem. You get to have a weekend. But just pro tip for all the weekend hosts on MSNBC. The more you say the name of that WNBA center who's being held by the Russians, the higher value you give her. If you want this without complication resolved, are you saying that the Russians planted hash vape cassettes on her at the airport? Whatever. But if you want that to go away, stop leading your weekend newscasts or shows with the plight of that that center from the WNBA.
Media
Just really
contagion
dumb.
is a real phenomenon. And the more you talk about something, then the more you emphasize it, I think the harder it will be to get her out of there.
Yeah, absolutely. And because on the weekend, all they're obsessed with finding a racial component in the conflict in Ukraine, because all the weekend hosts, that's their orientation. Everything's about race, right? And like, for instance, the polls were only letting in Ukrainian citizens first, and then others afterwards. But they had categories. They wanted Ukrainian citizens in first, and so their angle was, the polls aren't letting black people in. Well, they weren't letting Belgians in either. I mean, they weren't letting anyone who didn't have a Ukrainian passport in first, and so that was their angle. And then Jonathan, there's a guy. I'm getting tangented here, but MSNBC, instead of talking to any available Ukrainian member of parliament, like any other normal news outlet would do, they had to specifically get the only black member of the Ukrainian parliament. And the guy had nothing to say about race. He's saying, give us ammunition.
Much to their dismay.
Yeah.
Sure.
There was like visible disappointment on the host's face. And you're saying, wait a minute, black Ukrainian? Yeah, because there was a guy undergoing pilot training from Rwanda, and he married a white Ukrainian woman. They had a kid. The father was killed in '94 in the great ethnic civil war in Rwanda. And the guy, his son, went on to become a Olympic Ukrainian Greco-Roman wrestler, and he's in Zelensky's party, the Servant of the People Party, which is named after his comedy show. And so anyway, the guy had zero to say about any of that. It was a huge disappointment to whichever producer booked him. Well, if you watched some NCAA basketball, or I should say March Madness, according to GeekWire, what can we not say? Or is that just the superb owl?
Oh, yeah, that's a good question.
I don't think we're not making money. I'm just referring to the KTTH. And you pour, what kind of cheese do you put on it?
Really, all of my food groups consist
2 Cougar Gold bratwursts.
I didn't really know I was living there anymore.
They always come around to Ohio.
Auditions for stuff like this, like local.
The passing of John Clayton on Friday, I was struck by how struck so many people were. I loved his football talk and his commentary. Very sharp guy, and from apparently like 30,000, according to Flight Radar 24.
There's video of the plane itself going down, like in the process.
Video of here's the with 100, but I don't write books about it, and I don't think it's that great of a metaphor for life. But everyone knows football is a metaphor for life. I mean, who doesn't know that? Yes. So the 737 that crashed in China earlier today with 132 on board, not a 737 MAX. It's a prior model. Without the huge GE bypass engines that screwed up the center of gravity. This is a regular one. But here's the curious thing about this, about the Chinese 737 that crashed. It was a internal flight from one town to another. Did not originate from outside of China. There's video of it. And have you seen this video, Greg?
I've seen a few videos surfacing about the crash.
Streaks straight down from apparently like 30,000. According to Flight Radar 24.
There's video of the plane itself going down, like in the process. Oh no, I haven't seen
it. Looks like it. You know in the Tom Cruise remake of War of the Worlds, when the aliens go into the Earth. That's what it looks like. It's according to Flight Radar 24 at from around 30,000 feet. It comes down. And it had to be north of 500 knots, and it began coming apart before it hit the ground because 737s are not in any way, shape, or form designed to do that. So anyway, a very, very curious crash. And I mean, the dynamics of it are, I don't know what's going to be. I mean, even the black boxes have a limit. a dynamic limit of how much they can survive, but we'll see.
Yeah, 132 people on board, a biggest air disaster for China in a decade. No immediate details on the possible cause of the crash.
And they can't cover it up because we have the video now, and if it turns out to be something embarrassing to them, they will cover it up. So whether or not the black boxes survive is sort of a moot point, because the Chinese NTSB is really more about covering up and confirming the complete safety of Chinese airlines and the whole thing. I'm just curious because I couldn't. The model was really weird. I mean, I know how Boeing internally works. They don't call it a 737. It was a 738- something or other. And it as I was scrolling, it looks like it's almost exclusively used. Well, not almost exclusively used by Chinese airlines. So I'm wondering if it's actually. I mean, no matter what, the final assemblies in Renton of every 737, right? But they make sub-assemblies in China, but they don't do final assembly of any 737 in China. I don't know. That's a great use for the text line. 800-465-8770 if you're at the Lazy Bee or you're on your way there or way home and down to Renton. Tell me, I'm curious. But anyway, more information as it comes.